Hello and welcome. Hopefully, this time we've got everything right to the Late Late Show with Sean Mackay. Um, and tonight we're going to be talking to Shelley Francis, who's going to talk us through, as an English teacher in Wales, about the transition between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 writing. And hopefully, it's going to be a very, very exciting an hour. Okay, so back in. So, good evening and welcome to this Friday Late Late Show with Sean Mackay with my absolutely amazing guest, Shelley Francis. Hello, Shelley. Are you there?
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you, Sean. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. It's very, very cold around here, but very lit up with all of the Christmas lights. I don't know what it's like down there in North Wales.
Exactly the same, to be fair. Very, very cold.
Yes, it's getting much colder all the time. Thankfully, there are lots of winter coats to keep us warm. So, a great night. Thank you ever so much for joining us on this show tonight. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. So, let's get kind of straight into the questions and straight into the meat of it. So, as I do with every show to start off with, can I ask you what your favourite book is and why?
Oh, thank you very much, by the way, and real pleasure to be here as well. Uh, I kind of deliberated over this one, to be honest. I have so many different favorites. I think my all-time favorite's probably Wuthering Heights. Um,
Oh, amazing book.
just yeah, I just love the gothic element, and I really, really, really just there's so much to just explore in that book that I absolutely love it. One of my recent favourites though is The Narrow Door by Joanne Harris.
Okay. Yep.
Um, it's fantastic. It's such an interesting take, just the dual perspectives and really twisty narrative. Lots of surprises. It's a really good read.
Absolutely fantastic. I'm absolutely with you on the Wuthering Heights. It's one of the kind of books that I read at A level or had to read at A level. I didn't really read it at A level. I read the first chapter, middle chapter, and the end chapter, but still managed to pants, thankfully. The ironic is that I read the book after I finished A level, and now, like you, it's one of my favourite books. I think it's absolutely amazing. I love the Moor setting and the kind of how it built into that kind of gothicness of the whole kind of storyline. So let's go straight into the next question then. So first of all, can you tell us then a little bit about you, who you are, and your context, please?
Yeah, of course. So, my name's Shelley Francis. I'm an English teacher. Um,
Mhm.
I of I kind of specialise. Well, I specialised in my own degree with literature with linguistics. So I'm
Okay.
kind of cross theoretical in that perspective. I'm a
Mm.
really keen writer and reader, so I've got a
Oh,
real
good.
passion for literacy, kind of
Mm.
as a basis. I work in quite a rural area, which comes with the usual challenges essentially
Yeah.
for being in quite a rural area. We've got a mixed demographic,
Yeah.
some students that don't necessarily have the same cultural capital as you might find in
Mm.
kind of the bigger cities.
Yeah.
So it's just about kind of making sure that the students have the best foundation and framework to go on and succeed in whatever they choose to do. Um,
Mhm.
I kind of came to teaching quite late, so I have been teaching now for about 5 years,
Okay.
um, and really focused on kind of writing post pandemic. We found that it had a huge impact, um, a lot a lot to do with stamina really, but also kind of that foundational, the spelling, the grammar wasn't always there. Because I think a lot of students had worked online, that was quite exacerbated as well.
Yeah.
So really, that became my focus and my kind of area um, of expertise really over the last few years. As a
Uh,
result,
Okay, fabulous. When we talked a message earlier about coming onto the radio show, you told me about the fact that you were doing the stuff that you're doing is for the recent curriculum, kind of for Wales reform. Can you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about what that is and kind of what that means for the schools in your area?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's across Wales. So the curriculum reform is about kind of moving our curriculum towards the Estonian framework in a way.
Hmm.
It's the schools are given the opportunity to develop their own curriculum with a focus on child-centered learning.
Yep.
That kind of what we're trying to do is educate students according to four core purposes of learning. So you have ambitious and capable learners, healthy, confident individuals, creative and enterprising contributors, and ethical, informed citizens. So it's really about making sure that it's quite a holistic curriculum that's supported for the students in that area. But the main difference really is that rather than phases of education like we have currently and like you see
Hmm.
in the English curriculum, it's
Yep.
now more of an educational continuum. So it's more about the students' individual journeys
Right.
from like day one to whenever they finish education.
Hmm.
Now, obviously, that means that we rather than key stages, we have like what we call progression steps, and
Okay.
we had to kind of work out the progression steps with regards to kind of where a student should be to be progression step 3, for example.
Hmm.
And then we teach according to the progression steps. It's not necessarily about age or key stage, it's about
Okay.
the individual learner.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
That sounds very, very interesting. It certainly sounds quite complex as well. It must have taken a little bit of getting used to. I'm presuming that as with all things educational, when they come up with these changes, there was lots of discussions around the table and lots of kind of stuff for you to look at and read and lots of training that goes with that. I presume. Um,
yeah, absolutely.
so, so it's certainly sounds very good progression steps, so that the child actually goes through and they're not really looking at year one, year two, year three. It's just progression. You're just following the child. It sounds very, very student centric, which I kind of like. I think
Yeah.
that's brilliant. So having looked at that then and the Wales reform and thinking about you yourself as a writer, which is really quite interesting actually. What did actually get you into writing? Can I just ask that? I'm just going off the form here a minute, but what got you into writing? What made you a passionate writer?
Um, I think for me, it's expression.
Hmm.
I really love the idea of creating, like, and putting my own ideas down on paper and really kind of expressing my ideas in that way. I'm not
Yeah,
I'm not a fantastically confident speaker,
yeah.
so for me it was always kind of a stopgap in that, I feel like. So yeah, that's what got me into writing.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's go on to the stuff that we're talking about tonight, then. So, which is the transition between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3 writing. Now, obviously, on the radio station myself. As a literacy coordinator, I know the importance of writing, and I've done a lot on reading.
Mhm.
But as a writer, and writing across the transition, why do you think that writing is such a vitally important thing within kind of both primary and secondary, and especially in that transition zone between the two?
Um, so for me, writing is such a unique skill set because it
Hmm.
is primarily universal across all subject disciplines. If you want to go on to study it in an academic setting and
Yeah,
study it in further education, you are going to need to write if you want to study anything in an academic setting. So the ability to express yourself in writing is obviously, and your ideas as well, is
yeah.
really important. Is also from a well-being perspective, the idea of journaling, and like I said, that's my own kind of journey into writing.
Hmm.
And primarily because for me, writing is so important within our curriculum because it is formative and summative in
Yeah,
kind of its form, if you like. It is both
yeah,
what we learn, but it can also be how we learn as well. And I think in that way, it is like process and product of learning in one. And if we don't
yeah.
master that, then I feel like there's a gap.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree, especially when you said that it's something that's universal across departments. I mean, you only have to look at the fact that with all of the GCSEs that we have to do, every subject has an exam in which they have to write, and the better our ability to communicate within that writing frame, especially within exams, the more they are going to be able to express what they want, to answer those questions much more fully. So I absolutely agree with you with that one, because and it's how in the context of your school.
Mhm.
And because I know with my school, it's quite hard to um, get through to other departments how important writing is in terms of it's a cross discipline um, um, thing that you have to do. Has it been hard to get other departments on board to on this kind of writing frame and to show them how writing is so important to all disciplines?
I don't think it was so much the importance. I think everybody kind
Mm,
of really does respect the importance of writing within their discipline. I think
yeah,
um, where the struggle lies with writing, in particular within literacy coordination, is the confidence.
yeah,
Um, so recently, for example, we've been kind of working on a push towards like disciplinary literacy and the coordination of literacy within separate areas of learning. Um, and reading has had such a strong kind of response. Reading has been fantastic. But what I
mm,
found with writing was that it wasn't so clear what we were expecting to see. You know, when we were sharing good examples, you had to really
yeah,
kind of pull out what it was that we were kind of like focusing on in terms of, you know, this is excellent because, you know,
yeah.
and having to really explain that. And once that confidence is in place, that then kind of gives you the opportunity to really build on that and make that progress within the literacy um, and within writing in general, really, for me,
Okay.
I found.
No, that's brilliant. I absolutely agree with you with the discipline and literacy. That's one of the things that we've kind of been focusing on at our school as well, trying to get everyone involved in that literacy process.
Mhm.
Um, I think we'll talk again in a couple of seconds when we come back after this.
Okay.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online, and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials, and working groups at BET, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
So, welcome back to the Late Late Show with Sean Mackay with my special guest, Shelley Francis. Welcome back. So, we were talking a few seconds ago then about why writing is so important, and we looked at how it was kind of universal across departments, and then we kind of delved into a little bit of disciplinary literacy. So back to then the transition between year 6 and year 7. Why do you think then that there is this within this transition between year 6 and year 7, and it is such a small space of time? It goes from kind of the end of SATs, which is kind of May, June, until they come back in October. I mean, in the long scheme of things, it's not an awful long time, but there's a knowledge gap that comes through, especially in both reading and writing. Why do you think that is?
I think for me, any 6-week break is going to create a knowledge gap. I mean, particularly for writing. I think with reading, you can kind of scaffold it. You can give them materials to read, a reading list. They might do it, they might not, but chances are they maybe won't pick up a pen for 6 weeks. And that will impact, and that's going to impact at any level. But I think with the transition, what happens is that you lose that dialogue. So primary teaching is so child-centered. And it's such kind of such a practice that's driven by the relationship. You're able to say to a child, look, you could do that in July, so you're just forgotten, but go back in your book. And that's kind of what brought us to the task that I led. I didn't lead as such, but we were within a cluster. So I kind of represented the school and the literacy coordination from the school side of things, with the primary schools in our area. And what we worked on was a transition task. Because we're moving with Curriculum for Wales to this continuum, we have kind of it's progression step 3, essentially. So in theory, this is our starting point as secondary school teachers. And in theory, it's also the end point for the primary schools. So as you can imagine, you need to align that continuum. Those progression steps need to be really clear as to what they look like. So we aimed on kind of essentially creating this framework. And we did a transition task. So a standard task across all of the primary schools, that we built the success criteria together as a cluster, designed the task together, and then they did that in the books that they would use in high school. So it is at the very front of their exercise books in year 7, which kind of filled that gap.
So you brought their year 7 kind of books over to the primary schools, and their first piece of writing done kind of inside the primary school setting before they actually came over to the secondary school.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it's meant for us as English teachers is meant that we were able to we were able to kind of reopen that dialogue, if you like, and say, well, look, you could do that because you've done it here. So it kind of bridged that gap somewhat. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. It sounds like you've kind of while doing this, that you've kind of come up with a really close relationship with the primaries by creating this kind of transition piece that goes between the primaries and the secondaries. I especially like that kind of bringing their secondary school kind of books across to the primary schools, because I think not only does that give you that link between primary school and secondary school, and it makes the kids feel that they're just a little bit older than they actually are, but then when they come over to primary school, they've got something that they recognize, they've got something that's already familiar to them. I really like that. I think that's really quite cool. So yeah, it's great, because I certainly think the knowledge gap, we know that the knowledge gap in reading goes down, but I don't think writing is talked about as much. And I absolutely agree with you about the fact that, if you look out of a car window as you're driving down, there's always going to be a sign where there is something to read. There are billboards, there's opportunities to read all the time. But I think that's different for writing, I think. You don't pass by on a bus and think, oh, there's something I might want to write about. You don't. You automatically read a sign, you automatically read an advert, but unless you have something to write with and have the will to write, I absolutely agree. I think it's much harder to kind of plug that transition in writing than it is to actually reading.
Yeah.
So you talked about actually this next question I'm going to ask you. You talked about a little bit about this earlier, and mentioned it. So how important, because of writing, how important do you think that reading is to kind of good writing?
I mean, I think all of the evidence shows us that there are definitely links, and it is very important. I think reading is very important to writing. I think in terms of vocabulary, in terms of your sentence construction, your fluency with language and with reasoning as well. The evidence is really clear. My question is whether they're mutually exclusive,
Yeah.
because I'm not convinced that they are. I think could you be a great writer without reading any books? I'm not entirely sure. But perhaps you don't necessarily have to be an avid reader to be a great writer. Perhaps.
Okay. Interesting. Do you think, because for me, I always see reading in terms of the specific kind of books that you read. If you are reading books which are slightly challenging, then for me, what you are doing is you are gaining that sense of you are gaining a vocabulary, which for me impacts your ability to communicate and write better, and also the fact that when you are seeing sentences, you're seeing that creation of tension, the creation of character and plot, but also with the other types of writing, the non-fiction writing, in terms of seeing how instructions are created, seeing how bullet points are used, seeing how persuasive rhetoric is being used, is also something that kids might pick up. But I certainly agree to a point that, unless you are taught to see these things in reading, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to place that into your writing. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't need any writing within an English class, I would expect, because we just need to teach
Exactly.
reading.
Yeah.
And then
I mean, I
then be
think
good writers.
Yeah, I think exposure to high quality literature is definitely important for understanding like what good writing looks like, and that's
Yeah.
in every discipline. I think it makes it easier to discuss writing as an art form or as a transaction, so creative and academic writing. Otherwise, we would never use a model or a waggle, would we? But creative writing in particular, I think you could potentially still produce a quality piece of text.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we've certainly Chemistry Kennedy, who's just written, said that he disagrees. He says that reading, he thinks, is crucial for getting ideas on how and what to write. And his other point was that ChatGPT was trained by reading billions of existing documents. Therefore, that's why it can write quite well. I think there's slightly more to that. I think that AI has something to do with it, and the fact that it can learn slightly quicker than a human being. But yes, it's a very, very good point. So moving on to the next one, when we talked about the links in creating that kind of, or trying to bridge that knowledge gap between year 6 and year 7, do you think needs to be closer links between all primaries, whether it's in North Wales, whether it's in England or Scotland, wherever it is? Do you think there needs to be a closer links between primaries and secondaries to stop that knowledge loss that there seems to be?
I think in this case, I can only reflect on my own experience, and that is to say that this transition task for me, as a project, has probably been one of the most beneficial projects that I've ever partaken in over the course of my career in terms of impact on my classroom practice. The opportunity to kind of support the students to look at holistic progression, not just progression within like individual objectives, but kind of across the board, really. Being able to look at that framework and say, okay, so they can do this bit, but this bit, so how could I support just this targeted, this tiny portion of the progression step in order to
Yeah.
help move them along. And yeah, and being able to stretch and challenge as well. So being able to look at that framework and say, okay, so what can we do next? What can I do next with this individual learner in my classroom, who has come into my classroom at progression step 4? What can I do? I think it's just a good teacher can obviously, and a good English teacher in particular, can
Mm.
obviously
Yeah.
work out the gaps in
Mhm.
terms of spelling and grammar and sentence construction and paragraphing in terms of writing. They can work that out fairly quickly, but it stops you from having to kind of go backwards in order to do that. You don't have to plug the gaps like from from the ground, if you like. It's more about kind of targeting that support straight away, in
Mhm.
order to just affect progress for that individual learner. And I think that's ultimately, what we're all trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Do you think the transition, the stuff that you're doing, do you think that, I don't know whether you've answered this or not, that has brought your primaries, the ones that are in your cluster, and your school, as a secondary school, closer together? Do you think you are working much more closely now than you ever have been because of this? And has it is it working? Has it worked yet so far?
Yeah, I mean, for us as a school, and in the area that we live in, because obviously, as I say, it is quite a rural area, and we have quite a cluster of feeder schools that kind of come into our school. So
Yeah.
the transition framework is really, really, really good, and it's really
Mhm.
comprehensive in the school that I work at. So we'll take them away for a residential trip, the students in year 6 or year 7. So there are already those close links with the
Yeah.
primary schools. Um, but I think this task in particular, and I know my colleague that coordinates on numeracy at the school, she did the same thing. Um,
Mhm.
we've found that it has definitely helped us to kind of move them up that kind of progression ladder and make those steps much quicker than previously.
Okay, that's brilliant. Um, because I mean, I suppose one of the things that I've noticed in my school, is that, and certainly with primaries in England, is, me being a literacy coordinator. I am kind of in charge of the whole gamut of both speaking, listening, reading, and writing across an entire kind of school, which means
Mhm.
making sure that all of the disciplines are doing the same. And this is probably the same for you at your secondary school. Um, and the kind of the problem that I have had is that in primary schools, there isn't a single kind of entity that is in charge of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. What we have
Mhm.
is someone that's in charge of reading, someone that's in charge of writing, someone that's in charge of speaking and listening, and then you have someone that's an overarching kind of SLT member that looks after that. And
Mhm.
so, me trying to create better links for me, has been difficult because there are 3 different people that I have to engage with. Um,
Yeah.
and it seems to me, from what I've heard you saying with this transition, especially with the writing, is that if I did that as well at my school, if I tried to look at this kind of, this transition between, the writing at and bringing these books across, which you've advocated, which I think is absolutely brilliant, and having them write something, having them do something, and then bring it over to us, I think that could help the relationship that I would have with those teachers that are in charge of those things. So I think it's absolutely brilliant what you've been doing at the minute. Um, so um, going on to, the next aspect, what do you think then? So we've talked about writing a lot and how that writing gap is bridged and how we can actually turn around and make that a little bit better. But in terms of writing, what do you think are the key elements of good writing? What makes a good writer, so to speak?
Okay, so I almost kind of have to look at this from two sides,
Yeah.
because the one half of me, as a coordinator for literacy, as kind of um, looking at this across the disciplines, I think it does depend on the type of writing. Um,
Yeah.
I think content and composition for both, um,
Yeah.
what the student is expressing and how they're expressing it. But then creative and academic writing are so incredibly different when it comes to a question like this. Um,
Yeah.
so I think in academic writing, obviously structure is really vital. So a
Hmm.
good, strong, solid thesis statement that outlines viewpoint and intent, and outlines introduction essentially.
Yeah.
Um, concise topic sentences, which then influence the paragraphing. So
Yeah.
yeah, just making it really clear, making it really structured, linked ideas, and obviously using the effective planning strategies in order to create a comprehensive structure, I think is
Hmm.
important in academic writing. And I think that's kind of, for us, that's those are the foundations of our literacy priorities for extended writing. That
Yeah.
writing as a transaction should always be purposeful, and it should be clear
Hmm.
that the student understands that purpose. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, for academic writing, I think that's where I go.
Yeah.
Creative writing, though, I'm a bit conflicted on this one, because if a
Okay.
child is creating pathetic fallacy, for example, butterflies, say,
Mhm.
then the content is there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they've done what I asked them to do. They've created pathetic fallacy, and they've done it actually beautifully, because that's the imagery, isn't it? That's the effect that I wanted.
Yeah.
Even in a simple sentence, without any additions, without any, compounding, any subordination, any coordination, that's still good writing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a different skill in that respect. For me, I think what's key for both is like a clear understanding of sentence construction, a variety of sentences, create rhythm in creative writing, and explain well in academic writing.
Yeah.
Clear understanding of subordination and coordination, and yeah, uh, uh, yeah, and topic sentences to some extent. Although creative writing, obviously, that's slightly different. That looks
Yeah.
slightly different.
Yeah. Okay, that great. Thank you very much. I mean, certainly, I agree with you in terms of the fact that there is a massive difference between critical and creative,
Hmm.
and for me, as an English teacher,
Hmm.
it's much, and I thought this would be the opposite way around, but it is absolutely not. I thought that writing critically would be a much harder task to teach the students than creative writing, because I thought,
Hmm.
creative writing, you just use your imagination. It's not hard. You just use the kind of the language to create a scene which someone can actually think about, create characters that people can bond with, and just kind of that's quite an easy thing. With a critical kind of analysis, you have to think about what they're saying. You think about why they're saying it. You have to put it in a certain point of view. You've got to have a specific sense of formality. You've got different techniques that are being written about. You've got to look at the why the author is doing stuff. So I thought that would be much harder. But I found as an English teacher, it's much harder to actually use creative writing, because
Hmm.
I don't think as many students read as much as they used to do, and I certainly don't think that, especially in secondary schools, the older they get, the less imaginative they tend to be, unless, of course, it's one of the kids trying to get out of doing something, and then they can very imaginatively come up with a reason why they can't do it.
Oh
Um,
yes.
but but trying to get them to write something, the biggest catch that I have when they're trying to get them to write is, I don't know what to write, and
Yeah.
it's facing a blank page. I think
Hmm.
is one of the key things that I think is as a difficulty for students. I don't know whether you have the same at your school.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this goes back then to that question that you asked earlier. And this is where I kind of do think to some extent that you are absolutely right. I think understanding narrative and reading more, that will support good writing in that respect. Um, Things like characters, as you say, it's quite instinctive, I think, when you're a reader.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's much easier to write, creatively if you are a reader because
Hmm.
you've seen that creativeness yourself. You understand what the words mean, you understand how to put those words together much easier. So I
Hmm.
certainly think that those reading at that end is certainly much better. So we'll come back to Shelley in a second after the news.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
School summer holidays are often a hot topic, but they made the news again in The Guardian as leaders in Wales appear to be considering changes. According to reports, Wales's Minority Labour Administration wants to shrink summer breaks from 6 weeks to 5 and eventually reduce it to 4 weeks. The plan would see the time added to half-term breaks in October and May. The proposal would equalise the length of terms and break the connection with Easter by fixing the timing of the spring break regardless of when the religious festival falls. The newspaper says the plans follow research by the government which suggests that parents struggle to organise and pay for childcare over the summer. Plaid Cymru, which supports the proposal, said in a statement that the current calendar was outdated as it was designed a long time ago, and that some families find the summer break very long and impacting negatively on their well-being. However, the article also points out that evidence of the harm to learning from school holidays is unclear, as much of the evidence comes from the United States, where summer holidays can be up to 12 weeks long rather than the 6 to 7 weeks in the UK. John Hattie, Professor of Education at the University of Melbourne, said the effects from school holidays are very small, and there is little reason to believe that the length of the school year has much effect at all. A study from 2019 that looked at pupils from primary schools in an area of high deprivation in Scotland and England found no effect on reading skills. In Northern Ireland, schools typically have 8 weeks off in the summer, but generally have results in exams that are better than those in England or Wales. However, a 2022 study did find evidence of worsening mental health in some age groups over long summer breaks. Surveys done in Wales found 60% of parents said they were quite happy with the school year as it is. In 2013, then Education Secretary Michael Gove gave schools in England the power to choose the timing of holidays, but most schools kept the 6 weeks. The BBC News website reports on the Beyond Ofsted inquiry. The inquiry is chaired by former Schools Minister Lord Knight and is funded by the National Education Union. The report from the inquiry recommends that schools should instead be responsible for their own improvement plans. Ofsted has responded by repeating its previous statement that inspections are needed to ensure a high-quality education. The inquiry said that Ofsted was now seen by many as toxic and not fit for purpose, and in need of major reform. The removal of single-word judgments was also recommended, and this echoed another report on school improvement released earlier by the Institute for Public Policy Research, which also called for narrative-style judgments rather than single words. The Beyond Ofsted inquiry recommended stopping Ofsted from having direct contact with schools, and instead schools should draw up their own improvement plans, which would make them accountable to parents and the wider local community. Lord Knight, speaking to the BBC, said Ofsted created a culture of fear in our schools. His report also said that Ofsted had become under-resourced for the high-stakes job expected of it. A spokesperson for Ofsted said 9 out of 10 schools say inspections help them to improve. In related news, the current Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, has written in her final annual report about parents being increasingly willing to challenge school rules in England. She described the unwritten contract between home and school as fractured and that it will take time to repair. The report is broadly positive, but draws attention to a shift in behaviour, attendance and attitudes to education since the pandemic, describing it as leaving a troublesome legacy. Full details of her comments can be found across media outlets. Teach First has celebrated its 20th anniversary, with 3 former Prime Ministers praising the charity's work in tackling education inequalities. According to Teach First's own website newsfeed, the charity has recruited more than 16,000 teachers to work in disadvantaged areas across England. Teach First CEO Russell Hoby reaffirmed the charity's mission to help Britain's most disadvantaged children to achieve their full potential. Finally, student immigration data has been released, with Home Secretary James Cleverly stating the biggest drivers of immigration to the UK are students and healthcare workers. He further commented that this was testament to our world-leading university sector. According to data, Indian nationals account for over 1/4 of all sponsored study grants, followed by Chinese nationals. The education sector relies heavily on students applying to UK universities for significant funding. But there is also political pressure to reduce net immigration. Any plans to make changes to the current system will be monitored carefully, although for now the focus remains on illegal migration rather than legal routes. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
And welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio with myself, Sean Mackay, and Shelley Francis. Shelley, welcome back.
Hi.
So, one of the things, I'm going to throw a curveball in here because that news was quite interesting tonight. So, what do you think about the kind of the news that they're thinking about making half terms 2 weeks and reducing the summer holidays to 4 weeks? I thought that was a fascinating thing.
Yeah, and that's we got reviewed in Wales by the Education Workforce Council
Okay.
on that exact same topic, because generally they found that was kind of the response that was required, and that's what they wanted in the Welsh schools as well. A lot of parents had opted for it, and a lot of teachers too. I think it definitely streamlines the kind of school year with I suppose kind of the average working year in kind of a much better way.
Mhm.
Where I think I'm unsure, let me put it that way, is the idea of the 6 weeks for me. As a teacher, I quite like the end of a school year and
Yeah.
then the beginning of a new one. As in, I quite like that gap in between.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you could kind of coordinate it, really, you know, with the change in the timetables and things
Yeah.
for students. I think it'd be an adjustment, definitely.
It certainly would. I've been talking, amazingly enough, I was talking about this to one of my colleagues today, and we were trying to decide whether or not we liked the idea of a 2-2-2 kind of 4 year, and it is kind of, I don't know, because with the 6 weeks you're giving not only students but also staff enough time to recuperate. I think although they might get bored and it might get to a point where 6 weeks is a long time, I think by making them slightly bored by the end of it, they kind of look forward to coming back to their friends and look forward to coming back to school. I think if there's a 4-week gap and only a 4-week gap, then there's not enough time for them to be looking forward to coming back again. But
Yeah,
you know,
they tell us
we
they're
all
not
have
looking forward to it, but we know they are. They are.
absolutely, absolutely. Right then, let's get back to it then. So the transition between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. So we've talked about the key elements of good writing. We've talked about the transition between Year 6 and Year 7 and how we might be able to bridge that gap, especially with writing. So you talked about the key elements a couple of seconds ago, just before the news. Which of those key elements that you talked about do you think is the most important, and kind of why?
I think for me, it's sentencing. I think topic sentences, yes, but I do think teaching a variety of sentence structures in a way that students grasp the effect of certain structures and in sentences is probably what I would say is one of the key elements, because what we find, I don't know about you, but what I find and what a lot of my colleagues find at my school in particular is that in Key Stage 3, what students tend to do is build huge multi-compound sentences. So what you get is like, we went to the park, but it was closed because of the snow, so we ran to the skate park instead, and Billy threw a ball over the fence and we chased it. There was a dog, and there's no break. It's almost as though they've just kind of gone, I know how to do one of those sentences, so I'm just going to throw everything in it and hope for the best. And you kind of almost have to retrain them to start to think about that sentence as a building block. And the idea, and I really like that idea. That's something that I tend to use in my classroom, the idea of a paragraph as I use the hamburger paragraph usually, because I like the idea of the building blocks working together, and that tends to be where I'll start. But I mean, good sentence structure that will create rhythm in creative writing, but also that's how you're concise, isn't it? It's how you're getting your message across. So definitely, and once you've got that in place, I think then you can really start to build in those kind of additional ideas. Like Doug Limov, he was talking about this idea of fronting the writing. So you take a sentence and you ask students to write their ideas in a sentence at the beginning of a lesson, and then at the end there's like a revision process, and you might even do that as a collaboration, where you've maybe just taken elements of like change a verb here, or can we move the clauses around? And I think that's so powerful as an activity to look at a sentence just in isolation and improve it in a really targeted and directed way where students can really see the effect straight away. I think that's really powerful.
No, absolutely, and I certainly agree with you. I mean, even down to Year 11s, I'm marking PPEs at the moment, and I'm still having to kind of draw a line down 7 lines, saying this is a 7-line sentence. You know, this needs to be broken up a little bit. So, I certainly think that definitely having that topic sentence and then building the rest of that paragraph around that topic sentence and getting them to think about what that actually means, I think is definitely a really important thing for students to actually know. I'm just going to kind of because I've put an element of what is the most important thing. I'm just going to throw a curveball in here, which I kind of we've said what's the most important. What do you think could be the biggest difficulty for student in writing? I mean, we've talked about those kind of 12-line sentences, and but one of the things, for instance, for me is trying to get them to understand where punctuation goes. And certainly the other thing for me that's massively important, that's massively difficult for my students, is tense. They start in one tense, and then they'll change halfway through, and then they'll change back again. So what do you think, for you, what have you found is one of those key difficulties that students have in writing?
I'd agree with you, definitely tense. It tends to be a difficulty. And SPAG, we're starting to target. So we are starting with one of the benefits of Curriculum for Wales is that we are kind of moving towards quite a metacognitive approach. So trying to create these really independent, reflective learners. So one of the things that we do across the whole school and in a lot of our cluster schools as well, is that we do what's called dot marking. So we
Okay.
take a highlighter, and it's just kind of, as you're moving and circulating the room, you're just going to highlight in the margin or over across a spelling mistake, and then they're just going to start to reflect, and they'll change that. And the idea is that it's going to kind of improve their proofreading skills
Okay.
over time, and it is actually starting to do that. And you're finding a lot of students that are really kind of responding really well. That immediate feedback is really powerful.
Okay. Cool.
So that's spelling and grammar, I think, is one of those things. I think particularly post-pandemic, a lot of
Yeah.
students, when they were working online, obviously spell check is
Yeah. It's very easy for them to have.
a
It's just
factor. Yeah. So I think, spelling and grammar, tenses, and I would say planning for our students.
oh,
A lot of our
absolutely.
students they hate the idea of planning a piece of writing. And so
Yeah.
when it comes to it, it's like, oh, I know what I want to say though, miss. And I'm like, guaranteed it's not going to come out the way that you want it to come out unless you plan it.
Yeah.
So I think really, really diving in and getting across the importance of planning is really crucial, but also giving them a comprehensive way of planning their work that works for them as individuals, I think, is really important,
Hmm.
because it's not a one size fits all kind of activity, is it really?
No.
Particularly, planning, I think, is probably one of the biggest difficulties, because they have so much that they want to say. I
Yeah.
think, like, one of the things that I'm finding, we've been working a lot on oracy last
Yeah.
year, and obviously kind of moving into this year. But one of the things that I found is that, and this is one of the things that I absolutely, I'm really keen to explore and research and base a lot of my projects on, is they have such like high order ideas about what
Yeah.
they want to talk about. These ideas that are really complex, and I'm thinking, wow, I did not expect you to say that at this point. Like, amazing, well done. But getting those down on paper, it's just, I remember saying to one of my year nines when I very first started teaching, I said, you need to be able to express your ideas, because people without ideas, well, they don't change the world, do they? And he said, oh, miss, I know what to say, I just don't know how to get it down on paper. And
Hmm. Yeah.
that's something that I think, I'm really passionate about trying to support in whatever way that I possibly can. And planning, I think, is such a huge part of that, because then just being able to explore it first before you then put it in a paragraph, put it in a sentence, put it in a paragraph, then, I think that for me is the biggest.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I mean, it's one of the things that I've noticed, though. I mean, I keep telling students, you need to make sure you plan. You need to make sure you plan. And then I kind of realised, I think it was about halfway through last year, that I've never actually taught them how to plan.
Yeah.
So I'm making a much more of a conscious effort to show them how to plan, the different ways to plan things, how to make it much more detailed, and how to make it much more centered on the things that you want to tell people, and how to make that happen. And that's certainly helped with a lot of my students as they're coming through. I certainly think that's a great thing to focus on. So I'm going to come back in a couple of seconds after this.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, BET UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at BET, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
And welcome back to the final part of the show, the Late Late Show, with my guest, Shelley Francis. So, coming back then, Shelley, to the last couple of questions we've got for you tonight. So, thinking about what's most important for writing and what the best thing about writing is, how do we help teachers then to teach children to write well? What can we do?
So for me, taking that time to really explore those progression steps, to really collate kind of what that progress would look like was
Yeah.
so useful. I think not just thinking about the criteria itself either, but exploring like what excellence might actually look like at each
Yeah.
stage. I think with literacy, and particularly with writing, but also with reading as well and oracy, it's not a tick box exercise, and
Yeah.
it isn't about turning that framework into a tick box exercise. It's just really considering what matters in each discipline, each area of learning experience, and it's really helping us as a school and as a cluster to promote a higher quality of academic writing across that framework and across that area, and I think that's got to be good in the long
Yeah.
run. I think that also the kind of what we're doing with the dot marking
Yeah.
and what we're doing in general as well. So there are kind of various elements to it, but really creating those independent learners, giving that immediate feedback as often and frequently as you possibly can. So really kind of helping to support the writing process.
Yeah.
So the dot marking, as I say, has worked. Self-assessment frameworks. So
Okay.
really kind of thinking beforehand exactly what that good piece of writing will look like, not just about the purpose, but about the actual structure and the content as well.
Yeah.
One that I really like is Rally Coach.
Rally coach. Okay.
So yes, it's one of the Kagan principles, where basically you'll kind of swap a piece of work and put one book over the other, and it's two students talking each other through their work essentially,
Okay.
and helping it to support each other. It's a type of kind of peer feedback, but the way that I use it is that we build a success criteria as a group beforehand. So
Yeah.
I'll say, right, okay, so say for example, if we're writing a speech, so what does a good speech do? So then we'll say like, well, it's persuasive and it's structured. And I'll say, right, okay, so how do we know then? What are we looking for in the text? So there's like two columns to it. So then they'll say, okay, so discourse markers then. So they have to use discourse markers.
Hmm.
Or they have to use, they have to have an introduction that gives their viewpoint. The students then are creating their own success criteria. So then when you give them that success criteria, they know, right, okay, I can see there they've used discourse markers, tick it. Is it persuasive? Is it structured then? Well, yeah, the ideas are linked, so I can tick that and I can move on. And it's really helping them to support each other and kind of develop and give another dimension to the feedback essentially.
Hmm.
And then yeah, for me that last one is revision and redrafting. As I said earlier about the Doug Lemoff tape I was listening to, I think that's really powerful, and I think giving them the opportunity to see that as a really targeted, isolated sentence or portion of a paragraph, even showing them that rapid progress across a lesson, I think is really important, and I think it's really powerful. So yeah, just I suppose to summarize, I'd say explore frameworks, look at the purpose of a text and teach that explicitly. Narrate your thinking across the planning process. So as you're planning, as you say, kind of support that, talk them through it, tell them how you do it, and just feedback on SPAG as frequently as you can.
Fantastic. I think you've answered my final question there as well, I think, which is the one thing I really like about what you talked about, I think, was Rally Coach. So you talked about live marking, which I think is absolutely brilliant. It's something that I advocate as well. I think it's great them getting that immediate feedback, because then they can see what they're doing right. They can see the things that need to be improved. But I like that what you said about the Rally Coach and the fact that this is a very interactive thing. It's a very kind of there's no, how could you put it? It's about talking to each other. It's about covering someone else's book and just focusing purely on someone else's work and making sure that they are talking about the success criteria themselves. This is stuff that they are involved in, that they are talking about that writing process themselves. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And that's certainly something that I've written down loads about what you just said now, because I'm sticking on here and I'm going to try this again next week when I go into it, because I think that's absolutely brilliant. Just having those children just talk about what that success criteria is going to look like, and then once they've written it, going through and discussing those success criteria themselves and seeing whether or not they've got those things, which I think is absolutely brilliant. So Shelley, it's been absolutely amazing talking to you tonight, and I've got so much from you, from what we've talked about how you can how especially the bringing of the books over to the primary schools to get them to have something written, so that they've got something that when they come back they've got something from their primary school which is going to link to that writing genre and kind of bridge that gap. The stuff you talked about in terms of the things that make good writing possible, about that structure that you're doing, and the fact that you've got that creative side of it as well, and making sure that everything that is closely linked to the stuff that they're doing in the primary schools. Then you've got the stuff you just talked about the live marking, the immediate feedback, that self-assessment framework, and the kind of group work which is working together to help them. So many things that I think lots of people can take away and kind of and use and do that themselves in their own kind of context as well. So thank you ever so much for taking time, a very late time out of your Friday evening.
I hope so much for having me.
That's all right. I hope you've got something very nice planned now that you've finished, maybe a glass of wine, and I hope you've got something nice planned for the weekend.
I think we're just hoping that I don't get snowed in at this point, to be honest.
oh, snow there. Oh, okay. We're not snowing in it, but it does look like snow in the air over here as well. Right. Yeah. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope you have a great weekend, Shelley, and I'll see you all. Much. That's right. I will see you all again in 2 weeks' time. This is Teachers Talk Radio.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.